My name is Leonel Rourke. I'm 41 years old. The receipt was for $340 at a hotel 11 miles from our house. Dated the same Tuesday. Priya told me she was at a design conference in Dayton. I found it in the laundry, folded into a pair of jeans she hadn't worn in weeks, tucked so deep in the pocket it had gone through the wash and come out soft, the ink barely holding. 11 miles. Not Dayton. 11 miles from our kitchen table. I thought that would be the hardest part of my week. I was wrong. 2 days later, a woman I'd never met called my cell phone and asked if I was Priya's husband. When I said yes, she went quiet for 4 seconds. I counted, and then said she thought I should know something, and hung up before I could ask her name. But here's what she didn't know. I'd already found the receipt, and I hadn't said a word about it to anyone. I didn't know it yet, but the woman on the phone wasn't the last stranger who'd know more about my marriage than I did. 13 years in, and our mornings still had a rhythm. Coffee first, then Nora's hair, then the argument with Sam about socks that matched nothing on purpose. Priya moved through it the way she moved through most things by then. Efficient, present in body, somewhere else in everything that wasn't a task. I used to think that was just what happens after 2 kids and a mortgage. I told myself busy people go quiet. I believed that more than the evidence supported, which is its own kind of blindness, not stupidity, just hope wearing a work shirt. She'd started design consulting 3 years back, after Sam went to kindergarten and the house got too quiet for her to stand. I was proud of her for it. I still am, actually, even now. But I noticed, and dismissed, that the jobs kept multiplying. A kitchen in Loveland. A nursery in Blue Ash. A friend of a client, out toward the river who needed a whole downstairs redone. I never asked to see the invoices. That wasn't distrust, or so I told myself. It was respect for her work. Looking back now, that was the first door I chose not to open, and there would be others. The Dayton conference had come up on a Sunday night, casual, over dishes. 2 days, 1 night. A hotel block the Design Association used every year. I said that sounded good. I did not ask which hotel. I did not ask who else was going. I had never asked those questions in 13 years, and asking now would have meant admitting I suddenly needed to. She left Tuesday morning with a rolling suitcase and her laptop bag and a travel mug of coffee she made herself instead of letting me make it, which I noticed and didn't think about until much later. I dropped the kids at school. I went to work. I processed 4 claims and ate a sandwich at my desk and drove home at 5:40 like every other Tuesday of my life. The jeans were in the dryer because I was doing laundry, because that was mine, one of the small jobs I'd absorbed years back without either of us discussing it. I did laundry, she did the school forms, and somewhere in that division of labor we'd stopped needing to talk about much of anything at all. The receipt fell out when I shook out the jeans. I almost didn't look at it. I almost just balled it up with the lint. Something tightened in my chest before my mind caught up with why. 11 miles. A Tuesday. A room. 1 night. $340. I stood in the laundry room for a long time. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I put the receipt in my wallet, behind my license, and finished folding the laundry. And when Priya called that night to say goodnight to the kids, I said, "Sounds like a good trip," in a voice that didn't shake. And I still don't fully understand how it didn't. That was the first time I truly started to doubt, and I hated how calm I sounded doing it. She came home Wednesday with a canvas conference bag and a story about a keynote speaker who ran over by 40 minutes. I asked how the hotel was. She said, "Fine, standard, nothing special." 3 words, flat, moving already toward the coffee maker. I didn't push. Not because I didn't want to know. I was afraid of what I'd do with the answer if it didn't match what was in my wallet. That's my flaw, if I'm honest about it. And I'll be honest about it now because I wasn't then. I have spent my whole life smoothing things over. A canceled dinner reservation, a fight with my brother, a raise I should have asked for and didn't. I let things go because asking felt like starting something I couldn't stop. 13 years of that with Priya, and by the time it mattered, we didn't have any practice being honest with each other under pressure. We'd never needed it before. Friday, Marcus came over to help me get the grill going for the season. My closest friend since college, a guy who'd been best man at our wedding, who Priya trusted enough to leave alone with the kids. He asked, casual, how Priya's conference went. I said fine. He nodded a beat too long, and something in his face did something I couldn't name yet. And then he asked if I wanted another beer, and the moment passed. I filed it away. Everyone's face does something sometimes. I didn't know it then, But Marcus already knew more about that Tuesday than I did, and he'd known for weeks. The following Monday, the woman called. Her name, she eventually told me. Reluctantly, like she regretted starting the conversation the second she began it, was Denise. She said she'd seen a woman matching that description, with her husband at the Cardinal and off Route 4, more than once, and she'd finally worked up the nerve to check whose wife it was because her own husband kept lying about his work schedule, and she was tired of being the only one not sure what was true in her own house. I asked her husband's name. She wouldn't say. She said she'd already said too much, and hung up. I sat in my car in the driveway for 11 minutes before I went inside. I know it was 11 because I watched the clock the whole time, like counting the minutes might slow down whatever was coming. I didn't tell Priya about the call. I told myself I needed more before I said anything. That was true, and also a convenient place to hide. That weekend, at Nora's soccer game, Priya's phone buzzed twice during the second half, and she turned it face down on her knee without looking at it, which she never did, not once in 13 years of half-watched phone screens at kid events. I looked over. She caught me looking. She smiled, the easy one, the one I'd known since we were 26, and said, "Work stuff." "It's nothing." It wasn't nothing. She answered too fast for it to be nothing. If you've ever sat next to someone you love and felt the distance between you get wider without either of you saying a single wrong word, stay with me, because the next thing I found wasn't in a pocket. It was in a folder I had no business opening, and once I did, I couldn't put it back the way it was. I want to be clear about what kind of man I was for the next 2 weeks, because it isn't flattering. I became someone who checked the odometer on her car against the mileage a trip to Dayton should have taken. I became someone who looked up Cardinal and Route 4 on his phone at 1 a.m. in the bathroom with the fan running so the light wouldn't wake her. I became someone who remembered, suddenly and with total clarity, every small absence of the last year, the extra client meetings, the phone turned face down, the perfume that changed brands without explanation. None of it was proof. All of it was noise that had started, for the first time, to sound like a pattern. I found the printed hotel confirmation in her design binder on a Thursday afternoon while the kids were at practice, looking, I told myself, for the invoice from the Blue Ash nursery job, which I did actually need for our taxes. That part was true. What I found instead was a reservation, 1 room, 1 guest name, hers, dated the same Tuesday, same hotel, 11 miles from home. Not Dayton. It had never been Dayton. I photographed it. I put it back exactly where I found it, in the exact same folder, the exact same slot behind the color swatch samples. I didn't confront her that night. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. The truth was, I didn't trust myself yet to be in a room with her and not say something I couldn't take back. But here's what I didn't know yet. Sitting on our bed with her asleep beside me and a photo of a hotel confirmation glowing on my phone. The hardest thing I'd learned about that Tuesday had almost nothing to do with a room at the Cardinal Inn. It had to do with who'd known about it the whole time and had sat across from me eating my hamburgers and drinking my beer without saying a word. The photo sat in my phone for 6 days before I did anything with it. 6 days of packing lunches and signing Sam's reading log and lying next to Priya at night listening to her breathe, wondering how someone could sleep that easily next to a lie that size. I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to notice for years. The way she angled her laptop screen slightly toward the wall when I walked into the kitchen. The way she'd started taking her phone into the bathroom when she showered, propped on the sink, which she used to leave charging in the bedroom without a second thought. Small things. Things a reasonable man could explain away in about 4 different directions, and I tried every one of them. Maybe it was a work thing gone weird, a client dispute, a bad review, something embarrassing she didn't want to explain. Maybe the woman on the phone had the wrong wife entirely. Maybe I was building a case against a woman who deserved better than my suspicion. I wanted, badly, for one of those to be true. Denise called again on a Tuesday, a different Tuesday, 3 weeks after the first one. And this time she didn't hang up so fast. I looked him up, she said. My husband. Found out his name's on a rec league team roster with some guy named Kyle Vance. That's who I saw her with. Kyle Vance. I wrote the name on the back of a grocery receipt with a pen from my glove compartment, hands not quite steady enough for neat handwriting. Kyle Vance. I didn't know the name. I ran it against every contractor, every client, every name Priya had ever mentioned over dinner, and came up empty. Whoever he was, he'd never once come up in 13 years of conversation. That should have scared me more than it did. Instead, it did something worse. It gave me a shape to be angry at, a person instead of a fog, and for about a day that felt almost like relief. I mentioned the name to Marcus over beers on his porch, careless, testing, the way you toss something out to see if it lands wrong on someone's face. Kyle Vance, I said. Ring a bell. Marcus took a pull from his bottle and looked at the yard for a second too long before he said no, never heard of him. He asked if everything was okay with me and Priya, and there was something underneath the question, not curiosity, something closer to dread, that I filed away and didn't examine, because examining it would have meant asking my best friend a question I wasn't ready to hear the answer to. I didn't know it then, but Marcus had gone quiet the way people go quiet when they're deciding, in real time, whether the friendship they've protected for 15 years is worth more than the truth they're sitting on. Priya's mother came to stay for a long weekend in the middle of all this. A planned visit, nothing unusual, and I watched Priya transform the moment her mother's car pulled into the driveway, laughing louder, touching my arm at dinner in a way she hadn't in months, telling a story about our anniversary trip to Charleston like it was a favorite memory instead of something from a marriage she was, as far as I could tell, actively dismantling one Tuesday at a time. I sat there smiling along with it, performing my half of a marriage that increasingly felt like it existed only when an audience was watching. That night, after her mother went to bed, Priya sat at the kitchen table doing something on her laptop with her back slightly turned, and I asked, casual, I thought, though my voice came out one register too tight, how the Blue Ash Nursery project was going. Fine, she said. Almost done. Clients easy to work with? A pause. Half a second, maybe less. Yeah. What? No reason. Just asking. She closed the laptop a little sooner than the conversation needed her to. I noticed. I didn't say anything. I told myself I was being paranoid, that a closed laptop wasn't a confession, that I was seeing patterns in noise because I'd spent 3 weeks looking for them. But I'd photographed a hotel confirmation with her name and no one else's, alone, in a room 11 miles from our house. That wasn't noise. That was a fact I hadn't found a way to stand inside of yet. I went looking for Kyle Vance the way a man looks for something he's terrified to find, slowly, with detours. I checked her old client list, the one she kept in a spreadsheet I had access to because I'd set up the shared drive myself 2 years back when helping her with the business side of things felt like being useful rather than like snooping. No Kyle Vance. Not in the client list, not in her contacts, not anywhere I had legitimate reason to look. I found him instead through Nora, of all people, in a conversation I never meant to have. She was doing homework at the kitchen table, and she mentioned, offhand, that Mom's work friend, Kyle, had picked her up from a friend's birthday party 2 Saturdays back when Priya's car wouldn't start. I kept my voice even. I asked what Kyle looked like. Nora shrugged. Tall, she said, drove a gray truck. Was nice, gave her a piece of gum. A gray truck. A man my 11-year-old daughter had ridden home with, alone, from a birthday party. A man I had never met, never heard named, never once been told existed. Something in me went very still and very cold, and it didn't come back up for the rest of the night. I didn't confront Priya that evening. I told myself it was because Nora was still awake, still in the next room. That was true. It also wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that once I asked the question out loud, there would be no version of our marriage that existed the way it had 5 minutes earlier, and some part of me, the part that had spent 13 years avoiding exactly this kind of reckoning, wanted one more night of not knowing for certain. That was the last night I got to choose that. The following week, I drove past the Cardinal Inn on my lunch break. I told myself it was on the way to a client meeting, which was technically true and also a lie I was telling only myself, since I'd chosen the route. Priya's car wasn't in the lot. I felt something that was almost disappointment, which unsettled me more than finding it would have. I sat in the parking lot for 4 minutes anyway, engine running, staring at room numbers on the second floor like they might tell me something. And that was when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Hey, you got a sec to talk sometime this week? Just us. Marcus never texted like that. Marcus texted about grills and fantasy football and whether I wanted to split a fishing trip in the fall. He did not text just us like there was something he needed to say to me without anyone else in the room. I stared at that text longer than I'd stared at the empty parking lot. If I called him back right then, sitting in that lot outside the Cardinal Inn, I think everything that followed would have happened faster and maybe cleaner. Instead, I put the phone in the cup holder and drove to my meeting, because some part of me still wasn't ready to find out what my best friend had been carrying, and for 3 more days, I let him carry it alone. I called Marcus back 2 days later, not because I'd found my nerve, but because avoiding it had started to feel worse than facing it. We met at a diner off Route 4, not his porch, not my kitchen, neutral ground, though neither of us said that out loud. He looked like he hadn't slept well. I probably looked the same. "You said you wanted to talk," I said, before the coffee even came. Marcus turned his mug in a slow half-circle on the table. "Yeah." Then he didn't say anything else for a while. "Marcus, it's probably nothing," he said. "I don't want to start something over nothing. You texted me just us. That's not nothing." He looked up at me, and for a second I saw something in his face I hadn't seen since his father's funeral. The look of a man deciding which version of the truth costs him less. Then he shook his head and said it was about a work thing, a guy at his job he thought I might know from the rec league. Nothing to do with me and Priya at all. Sorry for making it sound bigger than it was. I didn't believe him. I also didn't push, because some part of me was still choosing the version of this where I got to keep not knowing for a little longer. That was a mistake. I know that now. If I'd pushed that morning, at that table, some of what came later might have happened differently. Sooner, maybe, or with less damage. Instead, I let him hand me his edited version, and I took it, because it let us both finish our coffee and go back to our lives for 1 more week. Priya's behavior kept shifting in ways I couldn't fully track. Some nights, she was warmer than she'd been in a year, cooking my favorite dinner unprompted, falling asleep with her head on my chest instead of turned toward the wall, laughing at something Sam said with a realness that didn't fit anything I suspected about her. Other nights, she was somewhere else entirely, present in the room and absent from it at the same time, answering questions half a beat late, like she was translating them from another language first. I didn't understand yet that both versions of her were true. I only understood that I couldn't predict which one I'd get, and that not knowing was its own kind of exhausting. I checked the shared calendar app late one night, something I'd never done in 13 years because we'd never needed to, and found a block on a Thursday marked simply site visit, BA, no address, no client name, nothing like the entries for every other job she'd ever logged. Blue Ash, the nursery job, except the nursery job, according to her own words 2 weeks earlier, was already finished. I photographed the calendar entry too. I was building something without letting myself think about what it was for. If you've ever caught yourself collecting evidence against someone you still hope is innocent, you understand exactly the kind of tired I was that week. And I promise you, the phone call that came 4 days later was worse than anything I'd found so far. The call came from an unknown number on a Wednesday afternoon while I was between claims. A man's voice, careful, like he'd rehearsed the first line and nothing past it. "Is this Leonel? Priya's husband. Who's asking?" A pause. "It doesn't matter who I am. I just think you should know your wife's been seeing my brother, Kyle, for a while now." I told him to stop. He didn't listen. "I'm sorry, I don't know you, but I know what it's like to find out too late." He hung up before I could ask anything else. Kyle's own brother, apparently, breaking ranks for reasons I wouldn't understand until much later. I sat at my desk with the phone still in my hand, and for the first time since the laundry room, I let myself feel the full weight of it instead of managing it into something smaller. My hands weren't steady. I didn't eat lunch that day. I don't remember driving home. That night, I lay awake next to Priya, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe, and I understood something with total clarity for the first time. I wasn't afraid of losing her. I was afraid of finding out I'd already lost her months ago, and had just been the last one told. She told me, much later, what that stretch of weeks had actually felt like on her end. This is what she was living through while I lay awake beside her, certain of nothing. I told myself it was almost over. Every single time. I'd decide, driving home from seeing him, that this was the last time, and I'd mean it completely in that moment. Then Thursday would come, and Leonel would be at work, and the house would be so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming. And I'd think about how long it had been since anyone asked me a question about myself that wasn't really about the kids or the house or what was for dinner. Kyle asked me questions like that. It felt like being a person again instead of a role I'd been playing since Nora was born. I knew what I was risking. I told myself the risk was smaller than it was, because the alternative, stopping, staying in that quiet house being nobody, felt like its own kind of loss. I didn't let myself think about Leonel's face. Not once. That was the only way I could keep doing it. That's what she told me. I knew none of it yet. I only knew that something had shifted in her, and I couldn't reach whatever it was. I didn't confront her that week. I told myself I needed the full picture first. One more piece, something undeniable, something that couldn't be explained away with a flat, "It's nothing," and a closed laptop. Nora asked me at breakfast why I looked so tired all the time now. I told her work had been busy. She accepted it the way kids accept most adult lies, without really believing it, just letting it go because pushing wasn't worth it. Sam, 7 and oblivious in the particular way 7-year-olds are a mercy, asked if Kyle was going to come to his birthday party, since Kyle had a truck and trucks were cool. I put my coffee down very carefully so I wouldn't drop it. "Where'd you hear that name, bud?" Sam shrugged. "Mom said maybe." I looked across the table at Priya. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Sam's cereal bowl like it required her full attention, and her jaw had gone tight in a way I recognized from 13 years of watching her face. And I understood, with a kind of cold clarity that had nothing left in it of doubt, that whatever this was, it had gotten big enough that my 7-year-old son already had a name for it. I still didn't say anything. Not that morning. But I stopped being a man gathering evidence to protect his hope and became something else. A man gathering evidence because he already knew and just needed the last door to close before he could stop pretending it hadn't. 2 days later, I found the folder in her car, and everything after that moved a great deal faster than anything before it. The folder was wedged under the passenger seat of her car, half visible when I leaned in to grab the umbrella I'd left there weeks earlier. Manila, unlabeled, the kind she used for client invoices, except when I opened it, standing in our driveway with the garage door still humming shut behind me, there was no invoice inside. There were printed photographs. Her and a man I now recognized from nothing but Sam's description. Tall, a gray truck visible in the background of one shot, standing close together outside a restaurant I didn't recognize, her hand resting on his forearm in a way that had nothing professional in it at all. Underneath the photographs, a handwritten note. Not typed, not a text screenshot. Actual handwriting. Hers, unmistakable, 3 lines long. I won't repeat exactly what it said. I'll say this, it wasn't about logistics. It wasn't about scheduling a site visit. It was the kind of thing you write to someone when you've stopped pretending, even to yourself, that this is anything less than what it is. I photographed the folder's contents with hands that weren't entirely steady, then put everything back exactly the way I'd found it. Same order, same angle, same place under the seat, and closed the car door like nothing had happened. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell Marcus. I didn't tell anyone. I drove to work the next morning and processed claims and ate lunch at my desk, carrying something the size of my whole marriage in my jacket pocket, and no one in that building had any idea. Sleep stopped coming easily after that. I'd lie next to Priya, my heart loud enough in the quiet that I was half convinced she could hear it too, and I'd think through the timeline again and again. The Dayton lie, the Cardinal Inn, Kyle's brother's phone call, the folder, trying to find the moment where I could have stopped it, and never quite landing on one. My appetite went next. Priya noticed, actually, in one of the strange warm stretches that still came and went unpredictably. She put a hand on my arm at dinner one night and asked if I was feeling okay, and there was something almost like real concern in her voice, which was its own kind of unbearable, being asked if I was okay by the person who was the reason I wasn't. "Just tired," I said. "Work's been a lot." She didn't push. I don't think she wanted the real answer any more than I wanted to give it to her yet. Marcus called again on a Sunday, and this time I didn't let him off easy. "You said it was nothing," I said, before he'd even finished saying hello. "The thing you wanted to talk about." It wasn't nothing. Silence on the line, long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Leonel, how long have you known?" Another silence, and then, quieter. "A while." I didn't say anything. I let the silence do what it needed to do, the way I should have done with Priya's laptop weeks earlier and hadn't. "I didn't know how to tell you," Marcus said finally. "You're my best friend. She used to be like a sister to me too." I kept thinking it would end on its own before it became something I had to say out loud. "You let my son ride in that guy's truck," I said, and my voice cracked in a way I hadn't planned on. "You knew, and you let it get that far." "I know," he said. "I know. I'm sorry. I've hated myself about it for weeks." I hung up without saying anything else. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a long time afterward, engine off, hands on the wheel, feeling something in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, something closer to the specific loneliness of realizing the people closest to you had been managing a version of your life you weren't allowed to see. That was the moment I understood the affair wasn't the only thing that had been hidden from me. My own marriage had a second layer underneath it, a circle of people who'd known, who'd made their peace with it in their own ways, while I was still down at the bottom trying to convince myself I was imagining things. She told me, much later, about the night Kyle's brother called him and told him to end it. This is what she said was happening on her end, the same week I found the folder. Kyle came over that Thursday different than usual, agitated, saying his brother had found out and was threatening to say something if he didn't stop. I remember feeling relief before I felt anything else, and hating myself for that, because relief meant some part of me had wanted an ending handed to me instead of choosing one myself. I told him maybe we should slow down. He said maybe we should stop entirely. I said okay. I didn't mean it, not fully, not yet. I kept the folder in my car because some part of me wasn't ready to let go of proof that I'd been someone worth looking at again. I didn't know his brother had already called Leonel. I didn't know how close it all was to ending on someone else's terms instead of mine. That's what she told me. I only knew, at the time, that something had shifted again. I just didn't yet know it had already started collapsing without me. I had the folder. I had the calendar entries. I had Denise's 2 calls and Kyle's brother's 1. And I had Marcus's confession sitting heavy in my chest like something swallowed wrong. I had, in other words, everything I needed to end this in a single conversation. I didn't use it yet. Instead, on a Tuesday evening, the same day of the week that had started all of this, I told Priya I had a late meeting and drove out to the Cardinal Inn instead, and sat in the lot 2 spaces down from a gray truck I now knew belonged to a man named Kyle Vance, and watched. I'm not proud of it. I want to say that clearly. But I needed to see it with my own eyes, not through Denise's voice on a phone or a folder found under a car seat. I needed one thing that was mine, that no one had told me, that I'd witnessed myself. She came out 40 minutes later, alone, car keys in hand, and there was a lightness in the way she walked to her car that I hadn't seen directed at me in longer than I wanted to admit. She didn't see me. I sat there until her taillights turned out of the lot, and then I sat there another 10 minutes after that, not moving, not thinking anything I could have put into words. I drove home before she did, using back roads I knew better, and I was in the driveway pretending to check the mail when her headlights turned in behind me. Meeting run long? She asked, getting out of her car, her voice easy, untroubled, a woman who believed her secret was still entirely hers. Something like that, I said. She smiled and went inside to check on the kids, and I stood in the driveway a moment longer, the folder's contents burning a hole in my phone's photo album, and I thought about all the ways I could do what came next. Loud, quiet, cold, careful, and understood that whichever way I chose, there was no version of tomorrow that looked anything like today. If you've ever stood in your own driveway holding proof of the worst thing you've ever learned about someone you love and said nothing and gone inside anyway, you already know there's a particular kind of silence that comes right before everything breaks open. I lived in that silence for 4 more days. What finally ended it wasn't a decision I made. It was a knock on the door I wasn't expecting from someone I never thought would be the one to bring it to my doorstep. The knock came at 8:40 on a Thursday night, while the kids were at Marcus's, a small mercy, arranged without my even meaning it that way, since I'd asked him to take them for pizza, mostly to have him out of my own house, while I figured out what to do with everything I knew. I opened the door expecting a delivery. Instead, there was a man I'd never met, mid-30s, jaw tight, standing on my porch like he'd talked himself into this and out of it a dozen times on the drive over. "You're Leonel," he said. "Not a question. Who are you?" "Dale. Kyle's brother. I called you a few weeks back." He shifted his weight. "I need you to know something before this goes any further, because I think you're about to find out the wrong version of it." I didn't invite him in. We stood on the porch light buzzing overhead, while he told me the affair hadn't started 3 months ago, the way I'd assumed from the date and lie and the earliest calendar entries. It had started last September, 8 months, not 3, back before Priya had ever mentioned Kyle's name to anyone, back during a stretch I remembered as one of the better patches in our marriage, a summer where she'd seemed lighter, happier, more like the woman I married. I had gotten the timeline wrong by 5 months. I'd been dating my own suspicion to the wrong beginning. Dale left without coming inside, apologizing again for something that wasn't his to apologize for, and I stood on the porch a long time after his taillights disappeared, recalculating an entire year of my marriage against a truth I hadn't had access to an hour earlier. Then I went inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and waited for Priya to come home from what she'd told me was a late client walkthrough. She came in at 9:15, keys jingling, calling out a hello that died the second she saw me sitting at the table with the folder open in front of me. The photographs, the note in her own handwriting, laid out plainly, no theatrics, no raised voice. "Sit down," I said. She didn't sit. "What is this?" "Sit down, Priya." She sat, slowly, eyes on the folder like it might still somehow not mean what it obviously meant. I laid it out the way I'd rehearsed it in my head for 4 days, flat, factual, no editorializing, one piece at a time. The hotel receipt from the jeans. The reservation under her name alone. The calendar entry marked site visit. BA for a job she'd told me was already finished. The photographs. The note. "Here's what I know," I said. "Here's what doesn't add up. I want you to explain it to me. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like. Leonel, I can explain the hotel. Explain the note, then. Explain why my son knows Kyle's name, and I didn't until 3 weeks ago. Explain why he rode alone in that man's truck." She started in on the design conference again, said the hotel booking had gotten mixed up with the conference block, some scheduling error, and I let her finish because I wanted to see how far she'd take it before the story stopped holding its own weight. "There's no conference reservation under your name," I said. "I checked. There's only this one. One room. One night. No conference." Her version shifted. It wasn't what he thought. It had happened once, a mistake, a moment of weakness she regretted immediately, nothing like what the photographs suggested. "The photographs are from 3 different days," I said. "Different clothes. Different weather. That's not once." She went quiet for a moment, jaw working, and I could see the story rearranging itself behind her eyes in real time, looking for the next room to retreat into. "Fine. It happened more than once. It still didn't mean anything. I never planned for it to become anything. You wrote him a letter, Priya. That's not nothing." Each time she shifted her ground, I set another piece of the folder down in front of her, flat, unhurried, colder each time, until there was nothing left in the folder and nothing left in her version of events that still held together. She stopped talking. The silence that followed was heavier than anything either of us had said, and it sat there a long time before she finally broke it. "You want to know how it started?" she said, quiet now, voice stripped of the deflection from 10 minutes earlier. "Fine. I'll tell you." She finally spoke. "This is what she told me. It was last September. You were working the Hendricks case, staying late every night, and I was here alone with the kids and the quiet, and I didn't feel like anyone's wife or anyone's mother. I just felt like furniture. Kyle did some work on a client's fence line, and we talked for maybe 20 minutes while I waited for a delivery. That's it. That's how small it started. I told myself it was nothing, just a conversation, and I went home and made dinner and didn't think about it again for 2 weeks. Then he texted about a job referral, and I answered, and I told myself that was still nothing too. The first time we met for coffee, I told myself I could stop any time I wanted, and I believed that completely. That's the part one need you to understand. I wasn't planning any of it. I just kept choosing the next small thing and telling myself it was still small. By December, it wasn't small anymore, and I still couldn't stop, because stopping meant going back to being nobody in this house again. And some sick part of me would rather have felt guilty and alive than comfortable and invisible. I couldn't look at Nora's drawings on the fridge some mornings. I used to stand at the sink and just stare at them. I tried to end it in March. I lasted 11 days. I'm not telling you this to make it smaller. I'm telling you because you asked, and because I think some part of me has wanted you to know for months, even while I was doing everything I could to make sure you didn't. That's what she told me. 8 months. Not 3. An entire year of our marriage I'd have to go back through now and see differently. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Not there at that table. Something in me had gone past both of those into a kind of stillness I hadn't known I had access to. "Does Marcus know how long it's actually been?" I asked. She looked up, surprised I knew Marcus was part of any of this at all. "He found out around Christmas. He told me to end it. He never told you because he didn't want to lose either of us." I thought about my son riding home from a birthday party in a stranger's truck. I thought about 8 months of dinners, of nights she'd fallen asleep with her head on my chest, wondering now which of those had been real and which had been management. I need you to leave tonight, I said. Not forever. Tonight. I can't be in this house with you right now. She didn't argue. She didn't beg. Something in her face had already accepted, before I finished the sentence, that this was where the last 8 months had always been heading, whether either of us was ready for it or not. She packed a bag in silence while I sat at the kitchen table with the folder closed in front of me, and when the front door shut behind her 20 minutes later, the house went quieter than it had been in longer than I could remember. Not peaceful, not yet, but honest, for the first time in 8 months, in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing until it finally arrived. The divorce moved faster than either of us expected, mostly because neither of us fought it. Priya didn't contest custody beyond what was reasonable. She knew, I think, that the 8 months had cost her more credibility than she had the standing left to argue with. We settled on a schedule by early fall, the kids with me most weeks, with her on alternating weekends and Wednesday dinners, an arrangement drawn up in about 6 weeks flat by lawyers who barely had to negotiate because there wasn't much left to negotiate over. Word got around Millbrook the way it does in a town that size. 2 of her regular clients quietly found other designers within a month. Nothing dramatic, no scene, just calls that didn't get returned and jobs that went a different direction. She told me once, on a Wednesday handoff at the door, that she'd had to rebuild half her client list from scratch, and there wasn't any satisfaction in hearing it. Just a flat kind of confirmation that consequences, when they come, don't always arrive as anger. Sometimes they arrive as absence. Kyle disappeared from the picture almost entirely once the affair stopped being a secret. I never saw him again. Never learned much more about him than a name and a gray truck and a brother with more conscience than he had. Whatever he and Priya had told each other in those 8 months, it apparently didn't survive daylight. Dale mentioned once, in an awkward run-in at the hardware store, that Kyle had moved out of state that winter for work. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. Marcus and I didn't speak for 4 months. When we finally did, over coffee instead of beers, neither of us pretended the friendship was exactly what it had been. He apologized again, more plainly this time, and I told him I understood why he'd stayed quiet even while I still resented that he had. We're rebuilding something smaller and more honest than what we had before, not what it was, but not nothing either. I could have stayed angry. For a while I was, in the specific, exhausting way that follows you into ordinary moments. Folding laundry, driving the kids to school, standing in line at the grocery store. But somewhere around the 6-month mark, without announcing it to anyone, I noticed the anger had started loosening its grip a little more each week, and I chose not to go looking for reasons to hold on to it. That was the only kind of winning that felt like it was actually mine. I started sleeping through the night again sometime that winter. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I had until it happened, and I lay there at 6 a.m., startled by how rested I felt. The kids adjusted better than I expected, the way kids often do when the adults around them stop pretending everything's fine and start just being honest instead. Nora asked me once, months later, if Mom and I were ever going to get back together, and I told her the truth, that we weren't, but that both of us loved her and Sam exactly the same as always, and that this was going to be okay, even on the days it didn't feel like it yet. She nodded like she'd already known the answer and just needed to hear me say it out loud. I met Renata the following spring, through a coworker's barbecue I almost didn't go to. Nothing dramatic. She asked about the kids, I asked about her dog, and it took root slowly, the way things do when neither person is in a hurry to prove anything to anyone. It wasn't a rescue. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't looking for someone to fix what Priya had broken. I was just, for the first time in a long time, a man who wasn't carrying something heavy into every room he walked into. On a Tuesday evening that October, a year, almost to the day, after I found that receipt folded into a pair of jeans, I drove the 11 miles out past the Cardinal Inn on my way to pick the kids up from Priya's, and I realized I hadn't thought about the distance in months. It used to sit in my chest like a measurement of everything I'd lost. That evening it was just a road, the way it always should have been. Priya answered the door when I pulled up, Sam's backpack already in her hand, Nora trailing behind with her shoes half on. We didn't say much beyond the logistics. Pickup times, a dentist appointment, whether Sam needed his inhaler for gym. Civil, ordinary. The kind of conversation two people have when the worst thing that ever happened between them has finally stopped being the only thing in the room. I drove home with both kids arguing gently in the back seat about whose turn it was to pick the radio station. And somewhere on that 11-mile stretch of road, I understood, quietly, without needing to announce it to anyone, that I'd become someone steadier than the man who used to fold laundry without asking a single question he was afraid of the answer to. That night, after the kids were asleep, I set my phone down on the kitchen table, the same table where I'd laid out that folder a year earlier, and just sat there a moment in the quiet. Not the old quiet, the kind that used to mean something was being hidden from me. Just quiet. I got up, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. That's my story. A receipt in a pocket, a folder under a car seat, 11 miles that used to mean everything and finally don't anymore. Thank you for staying with me till the end. If any part of this sounded like your own life, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Tell me in the comments. I read every one. See you in the next story. The hardest part of Priya's story was never really Kyle. It was the year she spent believing that being needed by everyone in that house was the same thing as being seen by any one of them. A mistake that cost her far more than the marriage itself. Looking at the whole arc of it now, the real collapse didn't happen in a hotel room off Route 4. It happened slowly, over years, in 100 small moments where two people who loved each other stopped checking in on whether that love was actually being felt, and just assumed it was, because assuming was easier than asking. Leonel's steadiness, the quality that made him a good provider, a reliable father, a man everyone could count on, became, without either of them noticing, a kind of absence too. Being dependable isn't the same as being present. It took losing everything for him to learn the difference. What's easy to miss, if you only look at the affair itself, is how many people around this couple made small, quiet choices to protect their own comfort instead of the truth. A best friend who stayed silent for months. A stranger who called twice before saying a name out loud. A brother who finally broke ranks only when guilt outweighed loyalty. Betrayal rarely happens in just one direction. It happens in the accumulated silence of everyone standing close enough to see it and deciding, each for their own reasons, that speaking up wasn't worth what it might cost them. Priya never got the version of herself back that she was chasing when this started. The affair didn't restore her identity. It just borrowed someone else's attention for a while and left her with less than she started with. That's worth sitting with, whichever side of a story like this you've ever found yourself on. Somewhere in your own life, is there a silence you've been keeping, not out of malice, but because speaking felt harder than staying quiet? What is it actually costing you to keep it?